Hello everyone, I'm Nayaswami Asha and we're continuing our 26 Keys to Living with Higher Awareness. We're now up to number 13, so we're crossing the halfway point in this really wonderful project. I was talking to a friend of mine. Swami Kriyananda's written 140, 150 books. Not all of them are large, of course, because he wrote a number of books called the Secrets books, which are small, but many of them are huge. But he's written commentaries on Patanjali and commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita and Revelations of Christ and his own autobiography and biography of Master. And I was with a group of people and I mentioned that I was doing these webinars on 26 Keys, and this man said, "Oh, that's my favorite of Swami's books." I said, "It hardly qualifies as a book, it's just hardly a pamphlet." And he said, "Well, maybe that's why I like it so much." But what he actually said, because Swami did actually publish this and put it into bookstores for a while. I mean, it's not very long, so it's hard for bookstores to really take it because it didn't have a spine. But this man was saying, and he's a serious devotee for many years, he just says everything about the path is in those 26 keys. And it really, if you just follow each one of them, you really have the whole story. Which, in fact, I completely agree with him. It really doesn't make any difference where you pick it up from. Swami often, and Master too, often made a big point of the difference between knowledge and wisdom. And in our intellectual society, we tend not to understand the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Because there's so much information, we think that to gather information will inherently make us wise. But if you understand, love God, where God is love, you can have enormous wisdom without having much knowledge at all. Ramakrishna was illiterate. Ramakrishna Paramhansa, the great avatar of the 1800s in Calcutta. He was illiterate. Anandamoyi Ma was illiterate. She couldn't sign her name. She had to sign her name, she just made an X. I mean, think about that. In our culture, of course, especially the American side, European side, Western Europe side, literacy is just so taken for granted. It's just hard for us to imagine not knowing how to read, or even knowing people who don't know how to read. And there are people who have trouble learning how to read, but still. But here are two of the greatest spiritual figures of recent times, and they couldn't read, because reading is actually a very secondary way to get information. The greatest way to get understanding is intuitively. Swami Kriyananda had a gift which he himself described as a gift from God, which is, he said he could put his mind on any subject and answers came to him. He became interested in astrology at one point, very early, in the very early 70s. He became interested in many things, but also in anything that could help him prove the ancient wisdom of India, among other things, or that from another angle could come to the same truths. And he wrote a book about astrology, Your Sun Sign as a Spiritual Guide, which is still highly respected as a classic in its field, even though Swamiji was not an astrologer. Of course, he understood many things. He studied it enough to know, but he just put his mind to it. And he put his divine consciousness to it. Let's be exact. He put the energy from the spiritual eye on that, and then he knew. He just understood because it was there to be understood. And Anandamoyi Ma and Ramakrishna, they could answer from their own experience. They didn't have to read. Books are just somebody else's explanation of what they've thought of. But great saints, the scriptural passage is read to them. That's how both Ramakrishna and Anandamoyi Ma would explain scripture. Read it to me. And it would be read to them, and then they would be in touch with the spirit that perceived it. Revelation is the perception of truth. And then from that same perception, they would simply explain what it meant. I had an experience of that. I haven't forgotten about number 13, which I'm going to read in a moment, but I had an experience about that in regard to the image of Kali, of that particular aspect of the Divine Mother as a deity in India. And we were traveling in India, and we were in Bengal, in Calcutta, as it happened during the time when they were having the festival, the holy days devoted to Mother Kali. And every neighborhood would get together and erect these, have these deities made and put up altars, and they would be chanting. It was absolutely wonderful. And we were walking through the street somewhere where one of these neighborhood altars had been set up, and the crowds were large, but we were actually focused in another direction. I'm not quite sure why, but we were focused in another direction, and because the crowd was pushing, I kept backing up to sort of allow more room for the rest of the group, until without knowing it, I had backed very, very close to this altar where there was quite a large statue of Kali. She was certainly as big as I am. Maybe she was slightly larger. And I didn't know she was there until I turned, and then all of a sudden I was face to face with this statue of Kali. Now Kali's the one with 4 arms and the tongue extended and the wild hair and the garland of human skulls and the sword in her hand. I mean, it's hardly blessed Jesus, meek and mild. It's not the picture that we usually have when we think about God in any form. She was fierce, powerful, magnificent, really. And I'd been seeing this deity everywhere. This was many years ago. I first started going to India in 1986, and it was somewhere right around in there. It was one of the very early trips. And I was looking so close, and it was so far outside of my Western upbringing. And Master really never taught the Indian deities. He didn't come to Indianize America. He knew all about them, but it wasn't something he was going to bring forward for Dwapara Yuga. But I'm looking at this image, and I respect these things. I'll tell you, after I finish this, I'll tell you another story about how I learned that respect. But I respect these things, but I didn't understand it. And I just looked at her, and I said, what are you all about? And from direct experience, I didn't have a direct experience of Kali, but I understood it. I could feel that some great sage, I mean, everything comes through instruments, some great sage somewhere had a revelation of the nature of God, and perhaps that form appeared to him, or he understood how to convey through symbol the revelation that he had. And in that moment, it was like Kali has a sword in one hand, and she's ready to chop off your head, and she's wearing the skulls. And on the other hand, she's offering you a boon. She has one of her other hands. She's offering you a boon like this. And just in that moment, I thought, yes, that's what life is like, isn't it? On one hand, sword is about to chop you into pieces, and simultaneously, God is offering you a boon. A friend of mine who went through a very challenging emotional test was talking about being female, a lot of tears. And she was just talking about having yet once again just sort of dissolved into tears. And then all of a sudden it crossed her mind, she said, it was so beautiful the way she told me, it crossed her mind that no matter what happened to her, she still loved God. And she said she just got right up, gave Master a great big kiss, and went on with her life. It's just like nothing can take away my love for God. And how powerful that is when the sword has been hacking you to bits. But you understand that the boon is there simultaneously. And you can say that in words, but it personified as Kali, it's really quite different. I was going to, just because I said I would, I'll tell the story, then I'll go to number 13. One of those very early trips to India, it may even have been the very first one, we took pilgrimage trips to India. We led pilgrimage groups to India for over 20 years. We did it not every year, but often. So we did quite a lot of trips. And we went to this very ancient Durga temple. And especially at that time, India's quite, in the little span of time that I've been visiting, India's just transformed. But their emphasis on cleanliness and order and many of the external things that are extremely dear to the American heart are not so dear to the Indian heart. Or if they are, other forces at that time at least were preventing it from coming out exactly the way I would have done it. And so the temple was, well, among other things, it was overrun with monkeys because Hanuman was a monkey, the great devotee of Rama, and the Indian culture reveres life and doesn't so easily slaughter or poison other living creatures. So the temple was overrun with monkeys. You had to actually, there were monkeys, a lot of monkeys around, and monkeys are not housebroken, so there was a lot of evidence of monkeys all over the place. It just wasn't my favorite temple. And there was an older man there, a pujari, a priest, and he kept putting a marigold garland around my neck, but the marigold garland was a little past its expiration date, and it had this very pungent, slightly fetid odor, and he kept putting it around, and I would slip it off and try to put it somewhere else, and he would find it and find me and put it back on me again. I couldn't communicate with him. I'm not quite sure why he was doing that, but he was doing that. And I began to think very much like an American. Why can't they keep this place cleaner? Why can't they do something about the monkeys? Why isn't this marigold garland fresh? Just a whole lot of things. And because I was thinking all these negative thoughts about Durga's temple, and I was not much interested in Durga, and I wasn't holding much respect for Durga either, I became careless about where I was going, and I was not moving strategically in regard to the monkeys, and I essentially got into the middle of the monkey pack instead of staying on the edge. And one of the monkeys did not like that, and he came after me. And he wasn't a little cute monkey, he was a solid monkey, not a gorilla, but a solid monkey. And he jumped on my back. And it's such a moment to have him jump on your back. And actually I'm quite proud of myself because I apparently, and this I only really knew later, I grabbed him and I ripped him off and I threw him on the ground. And I screamed, "Get off of me, you filthy thing." That's what I said, like that. At which point I got a lot of attention in the temple. And then I was wearing a skirt, thank God, and the monkey sank his teeth into my skirt. And still, I was just saying, "Let go of me." I was so mad at him. "Let go of me, let go of me." I pulled on my skirt like this, and he'd closed his mouth over it. I mean, if it had been my arm, he would have done the same thing. And so my skirt ripped, a big hole came out of my skirt. And by that time, there were all these people around me, and they were dealing with the monkey and all of that. But it was a magnificent moment. And my heart said, I heard Durga say to me, "Don't mess with me, honey. You don't know what's going on here." Durga rides a lion. She's a really fierce aspect of Divine Mother, and she just said, "Don't mess with me, girl. You don't have a chance." And I heard it. Don't be superficial about these things. There's real power here. And I came home, and I came back to America afterwards, and I went to the local fabric store, and I got a decal, a little embroidered decal, and it was a monkey. And I carefully mended my skirt and sewed the monkey on it. And I wore that skirt in India a lot. And I always would look at that monkey and say, "Don't mess with me, girl. There's a lot going on here you don't know." Well, that was a long, just wandering, but there you have it. Number 13. Give your full attention to everything you do. Live wholeheartedly here and now. The reality of the past is that it has helped to create the present. That's the reality of the past, that it has helped to create the present. The future will be determined by how wisely or unwisely you live now. Do your best today, and the results will take care of themselves. Indeed, they will reflect the very best that is in you. Very, very, very interesting. Swami Kriyananda was extremely single-minded in his concentration, and he was prodigiously creative. I mentioned his 140 or 50 books, and he wrote hundreds of pieces of music and lectures in counseling and correspondence and a little bit of painting, photography, architecture, administration. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And when people would sometimes remark, how do you do this? And his answer was always by concentrating completely. I mean, his answer was many things. His main answer was just put your attention at the spiritual eye and Master will make it possible. But the way he acted as an instrument was he always said, concentrate completely on whatever you're doing now. And he said, among other things that happen, is that answers will come to you very quickly. And the illusion that it takes time to accomplish something will be dispelled. He said it takes energy to accomplish. And one of the reasons it takes many people a long time to do things is that it takes time for them to invest enough energy in order to bring the result that they want. And it takes time because they don't concentrate completely. That only a piece of their concentration is in what they're doing, or their concentration is constantly interrupted, so that it just takes, much more time has to elapse before enough concentration is there. Whereas Swamiji, when he was working on something, he was totally working on it. I remember when he was writing the oratorio, after he returned from the Holy Land, and he wrote the music and the words and everything. He was so immersed in music that someone remarked, and it was true, he was having dinner with a few friends, and one friend remarked, she said to Swami, I get the feeling when you look at me, you're trying to decide whether I'm a B flat or an E, or what key I'm in. You know, am I a minor chord? Am I a major chord? It was as if his whole consciousness was music. And even when he was with people, he couldn't quite comprehend the reality of people because his whole consciousness was in music. Swami put it also another way. He said, when I'm writing music, when I'm in a writing music cycle, he said, I can't even remember what it is to write in words. He said, it goes away from me completely. And he said, when I'm writing a book, he said, I can't remember what it is to write music. So instead of sort of dispersing some of his energy, it's like in the moment that it's needed, it will be given to you. And when it's not part of my reality, it's gone completely. And he was also just absolutely one-pointed in his concentration at all times. Have been, I'll try to say that I'm less so now, I have been scattered in my focus, and I have a lot of Gemini in my horoscope. For those of you who follow that, I only followed a tiny bit. But the Gemini is interested in everything. And I'm always doing multiple things at the same time. And so often Swami would be working on something and I would want to ask him a question, and I wasn't always sensitive. But he would never break his concentration merely because I was trying to distract him. I mean, partly he was trying to show me, but it was also true. When he was, I used to deliver his mail to him when I worked as a secretary. This is now many, many decades ago. But I would bring him his mail in the afternoon, and he got a lot of letters then. Email hadn't been invented, so everything was paper. And people would sometimes ask me, or I would say to them, write to Swamiji. He reads every letter that he gets. And I said, he doesn't merely read it. It's not like he skims it. When he's reading a letter from someone, he absolutely, nothing exists except the letter that he's reading. You're sitting right there with him, he opens the letter. There's no point in asking him any question. He just goes and he reads the letter. He concentrates completely on whatever it is that he's doing in the moment. And that's where real power comes from. Some friends of mine they met each other, and within a couple of weeks they had decided to get married. And they wrote to Swamiji about it and, just commented that they felt very confident even though not much time had passed. And Swami supported them in that decision, and he wrote back very interestingly. He said, it takes energy to make good decisions. It doesn't necessarily take time, it just takes energy. And energy is infinite and omnipresent. This is the whole principle of the energization exercises, which are a fundamental practice of the path of Kriya Yoga. The energization exercises are based on that fact, that energy is infinite and energy is omnipresent. And the amount of energy that we have, even in a physical sense, what to speak of creative or energetically, the amount of energy we have is the degree to which we concentrate and magnetize that energy to us, in which we direct our will toward opening ourselves to be a channel to pull that energy through us. The energization exercises are really foundational to the path of self-realization. It was Master's original contribution. I mean, he had many creative contributions, but the energization exercises are something he invented. You know, you don't invent Kriya Yoga, you merely convey it. But the energization exercises he invented. They were a technique for concentration and magnetizing energy. Very, very important to our path. Many people miss the point on them. But if you can draw energy at will, if you can concentrate sufficiently to draw energy at will, and to not be distracted, I mean, that's everything. The energization exercises appear to be physical because you access the energy. You use your body as the vehicle to access it because your body's right there. It's easy to access through it. But the training is of the will and concentration. Train your will and concentration, and the entire spiritual path opens up to you. And so Swami saying here, give your full attention to everything you do. I remember when I first started traveling outside of Ananda village, the first 16 years of my spiritual life were lived at Ananda village. And it's not like I never left, but, well, actually, the first 12 years or so. And then for a few years before I moved from Ananda village to Palo Alto, California, where now we have an Ananda Palo Alto. I started a career of traveling and giving classes by visiting. There was a small center in Palo Alto at that time, and I would leave Ananda village on Monday, and I would teach Monday in Sacramento, Tuesday in San Francisco, and Wednesday in Palo Alto, which is, just the total distance of 3 or 4 hours from Ananda village. And I would teach the same series, like whatever it might be, superconscious living, love, human and divine, whatever it might be, magnetism, energy, affirmation. 4-part series, 1, 2, 3 in different cities, and then I go back and do the second class in each city. And I'm entirely spontaneous in the way that I talk. And especially, well, not even especially, but I'm entirely spontaneous. So there's a live audience in front of me. And each of those, the congregation in each of those 3 cities had different vibrations. Of course, there were different individuals, but they also had different vibrations. So the way you would present the same subject, you would do it differently in Sacramento, San Francisco, and Palo Alto. And I probably made audio recordings, but we didn't have video cameras like we do now. But after I went through the first series, I realized, how am I going to have any idea what I said? And when I go back to Sacramento for class number 2, how am I going to be able to tell? Actually, I asked Swamiji this question before I started. How am I going to be able to tell what I just did? And Swami's answer was very casual, by concentrating completely while you do it, by being completely conscious while you do it. That's what he said. Oh, I said, it's rather sarcastic. Oh, okay, that's all there is to it then, to be completely conscious. But it was interesting because he was right. I mean, I am conscious when I'm doing something like this because I trained myself to be so. By the grace of God, I'm not conscious like Swami, but in my own little spectrum, I'm up toward the upper edge of it when I'm doing things like this. And as soon as I was back in Sacramento, I remembered, because it was imprinted there. Because when I was participating, I was fully participating, and therefore it stays with you. I recently, totally off the subject, but only slightly, I recently got a speeding ticket. I have a car, it's maybe a year or 2 old. I traded in a car that was 16 years old for this one. And it's a Toyota, just the car that everybody drives. But it's a nice car, and it's new, and it's quiet, and it has way, way too much power for just some ordinary person just traveling on ordinary highways. that darn car goes 90, and it just goes 90, and you don't even notice. And that's the point. I got a ticket for going 87 miles an hour in what was actually a 60-mile zone, but the policeman saved me apparently a couple of $100 by saying it was a 65-mile zone. I didn't ask, I just accepted it. But I didn't, someone said all the different ways that you could try to get out of it. I said there was no way I was going to try to get out of it. I was going 87 miles an hour, and nobody should be driving who doesn't know they're going 87 miles an hour. I was listening to Swami sing on the CD. I was up near Ananda village on the part open highway. There wasn't a soul on the highway but me. Sun was shining, the trees were so green. I forgot that I was driving. And you should not be driving if you don't know how fast you're going. You just should not be doing it. You have to be more conscious than that. And I was very grateful for the $400 ticket that I got, because I slowed down. And I'm going to be really much more careful from now on. It actually really scared me. I wasn't out of control, but I was unconscious. Sometimes people who give classes and speak have trouble with time, in the sense that they often, I'm not making a big blanket statement, but sometimes people talk longer than they know they're talking. They're given 20 minutes and they go 40, they're given 10 and they go 20. But my feeling is, if you're not conscious of how long you've been talking, perhaps you're not conscious enough to be talking. And, everybody has their piece of it, but we need to be completely aware of what we're doing when we're doing things. Now, give your full attention to everything you do. Live wholeheartedly here and now. Now, you might say that if you're talking and you don't know what time it is, you're really in the here and now. You're in the flow of your inspiration. And if I'm just listening to Swami driving down the highway and not looking at the speedometer, maybe I'm in the here and now. But we need to keep all the elements that we need to be involved with. We need to know where we are. We need to know what we're doing. And now Swami gives us a couple of really good reasons, because where are we when we're not concentrating? We are either in the future or in the past. It's very interesting. Watch yourself. You're either in the future or in the past. I don't know, when I'm going 87, I was listening to Swami sing, so where was I? I was sideways from what I was doing. But most of the time, when we're not concentrating, we're letting our mind drift to the past or the future. And Swamiji's comment, the reality of the past is that it has helped to create the present. Now, he's stepping out of just this number 13 when he says that. The only reality of the past is that it has helped to create the present. And think how much we struggle with the past. Longing and regret. That's what causes us to reincarnate. Longing and regret. Where does longing, where does regret come from? It comes from the way we think about the past, that the reality of the past is with us. Oh, if only. As if we were really as if destiny could be changed. The great question of free will, which everyone is always asking. Master said almost everything is determined by the karmic trajectory. And that karmic trajectory is the momentum that you've set in motion. And it's, because I was talking about going 87 miles an hour, when you're going that fast, which we always are going full speed through our lives, you may know that you need to make a turn, but you have to shift the momentum. If you miss the freeway exit, you have to do a certain amount to get your car turned around and going back the right way. And we're on this karmic trajectory. And the past is real because the past has pushed us. The past of yesterday, the past of this morning, the past of incarnations hundreds of years ago. I've had one dream in my life that was truly a past life. I mean, who knows, maybe other dreams were fragments of it, but I actually dreamt a previous incarnation just one time in my life. And it was to explain a very very difficult relationship I was having in the present, where both of us were just constantly overreacting to the actions of each other. If you looked at those actions only in the context of what was actually happening in the present. So God gave me this dream, and the dream happened with carriages drawn by horses at a time when there were kings and queens with absolute power. So that was not yesterday chronologically. That was who knows how long ago, and where and what and who. It was certainly centuries ago at the very least. But the energy of that lifetime was influencing me as if it had happened 5 minutes ago. It was just absolutely why the relationship was so difficult in the present, is because the present was created by the past. And that was a completely unresolved, unreleased past. So it was just right there in the present. The reality of the past is what it has contributed to the present. Now that's a little creepy in certain ways, because we don't remember our past lives, and we don't know what's going on. It's liberating also because it helps you to understand that if you're in the here and now, and this is what I gradually discovered in that relationship, which enabled us to come to harmony, was if I could be here and now, if I could give my full attention to what I was doing right now in conversation, being in the here and now, there was no problem. There was literally no problem. There was no antagonism. There was no effort to hurt. There was no cause for mistrust. It was entirely from the past. The reality of the past was only what it was causing in the present, because as Swami put it, because in that past life and then the one that the other person contributed of my horrible behavior, both of us had behaved in really, 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 really bad ways. Really bad ways. But Swami just looked at us both and said so simply, neither of you would ever behave that way again, ever. You're not that person anymore. So why allow the present to be determined by that? The reality of the past was only insofar as we were not releasing it. If we were concentrating here and now, we were two sincere people with slightly different personalities, but that was all. Nothing of the rest of it was real. Imagine how free we would be. I was contemplating recently if we could let go of all of that. You see, what we do is we remember our past lives either intuitively, literally, or some psychic tells them to us, either apocryphal or real. And then it justifies our wrong attitudes in the present. We use them. You see, the reason I feel this way is because thus and so a time, and I used to be so-and-so's slave, and he really abused me, and I was this, and now I have to be that, and it's all justification rather than just releasing it and being in the here and now. What is happening in the here and now? Who am I now? Who are these people to me now? Why should I let myself be ruled by that which isn't even here anymore? And now you see that requires, as Swami writes, we have to give the full attention to where we are now and be in the here and now. That's where freedom comes from. I had a lot of difficulty, have had a lot of difficulty writing, and I'm largely over it now. But it was a major struggle for me for a long time. And many reasons, but one of them was every time I'd write something, I'd immediately evaluate it, and then I would imagine whether other people in the future who would read it would like it or not. It's just a constant, it was crazy. It was completely obsessive and unwholesome, but it was a necessary karma. But instead of just being in the here and now and thinking, what do I have to say and how can I say it, I would move into the future. Will the book be a bestseller? Will people get mad at me if I say this? Will so-and-so like it or not? None of that was happening in the moment. But immediately my concentration would slip into the future. Or my concentration would slip into the past of who knows what. But when you're really creating, and this is what Swami said, there is no reality except what you're doing. You mean you yourself cease to exist as an egoic entity. There's just the flow of creativity. That's all. I mean, it's a very divine gift to be able to concentrate so deeply that you can just create. And that's where the greatest creativity comes from, when you've put your attention at the spiritual eye and then just allow what needs to happen through you without regard. When I have finally been able to, the book that I published about Swami Kriyananda, which doesn't sell as well as it should, but it ought to. It's a really nice book. Here it is. And it's stories that I collected from many people about Swami Kriyananda. It was a big responsibility. I took it very seriously, and it made me kind of neurotic for a long time until I finally did it. But when I finally did it, I succeeded in writing it, is what I mean. It became very impersonal, just because it was just done. I wrote it as best I could in the here and now, and it was just finished. And I didn't worry about it. It was either good or it wasn't good. People liked it or they didn't like it. I think it's a very nice book. But I concentrated on it and I just did it. There's such freedom in that. I wish I could be so free in everything that I do. You know, when we talk to people, we have conversations, we worry so much. But if we're just in the here and now, and also things go as they're meant to go when we're concentrating in the here and now. When they go badly, it's because we're in the past or in the future. And therefore, we're not able to attune right where we're standing. How much we suffer with past life memories, whether we even know it or not. I was going to say, I started to say it and I lost track of it. I'm writing a book now. This is being recorded in, let's see, where are we? February 2016. And I'm working on a book about Swami, a different one than the one I just wrote, than the one I just held up to you. And I was going back. This is a chronological story, beginning pretty much from when I first met him. It's my perspective on Swami's life. So I'm not trying to be a journalist. I'm not trying to write a third-person biography of his life in which I interview and gather. It's just my perspective, what I witnessed, what I experienced, what I've decided, what I believe is true. And it is just my perspective. But I was back in the 1970s when that's where I am in the story, which is pretty early. When I was working as Swami's secretary, during those few years that I did that, in which, and I tell this in the other book too, but I'm working on it again, in which every afternoon, I and Seva and Kalyani and sometimes a few others would come to Swami's house. There was no email and he had no telephone. And so he would just work. He was working on writing the path, and he was in seclusion most of the day. And then we would come with messages and mail and news and so on, every day, every weekday, sometimes on the weekends. And I worked for him. He paid my salary by opening his wallet and giving me money every month. And I had no priorities, no priority except serving him. It wasn't even that he was my first priority, he was my only priority. So I never had any plans, almost never, except when he was out of town, because I always wanted to be available. And when we came over in the late afternoon, sometimes we wouldn't leave till midnight, make dinner or do other things. Swami had a very flexible sense of time. But every single afternoon when we showed up, he seemed genuinely surprised that we were there again. And later I actually talked to him about this because, as I said, I wrote some of this in the other book. Because he practiced every night something he told us to practice, has told us to practice. Every night he said, before you go to sleep, he said, take everything that day has been about and give it all back to God. He said, build a bonfire if you like, and put everything in it. Everything, all your self-identity, all your attachments, all your expectations, just surrender them back. And I felt that Swami always did that. It was nishkam karma for him always, meaning he just action without attachment or desire for the fruits of the action. So when the day was over, which is an arbitrary ending point, but meditating in morning and night, he just let it all go. And so whatever came back the next day was always a gift. It wasn't owed to him. There was no expectation, really, literally, no expectation, and certainly no attachment to an outcome. And so even though I worked for him, and if he'd really stopped to think about it, he could pretty much bet that I was going to show up again. But his heart was so free that every time I came in, it was just like, it wasn't just me. It was like, oh, look, there it is. It's happening again. Think how free that is. I heard something in a trivial way, but not trivial, talking about dogs and how much human beings can learn from dogs. And the dog says, when somebody you love comes into the room, even if they come into the room 5 times a day, he said, you should go wild with joy every time you see them. No, a dog is not very centered, and the dog doesn't have the egoic self-identity to keep track quite like human beings do. But having the freedom to have every moment be ever new and not be always remembering, oh yes, it's 4 o'clock, that's when my secretary comes to type my manuscript, which is in fact, it was 4 o'clock, and his secretary was coming to type his manuscript, and he could count on that. But he didn't. He was in the here and now, and when that shifted, the past is only real insofar as it influences the present, but the past isn't real, and the future isn't real. But the other liberating side of this, which for me on the spiritual path, I was 18 years old, 19, when I read in Vivekananda's book about karma yoga that today is determined by the actions of yesterday, tomorrow is determined by the actions of today. It's very difficult for me to express how absolutely life-changing that perception was to me, that principle was to me. I was relatively speaking young, but I was intense from a very young age. To get a clue as to what the heck was going on in this planet, on this planet, in this life. I grew up in an ordinary way among educated and very intelligent people, but not wise compared to Swamiji wise. They were wise in many ways. They were effective in many ways, and they were certainly intelligent and well educated and good. I don't want to denigrate it too much, but they didn't know the meaning of life. I'm not sure they were all that interested in the meaning of life, but they didn't know it. And none of my teachers knew it, none of my neighbors knew it. Nobody knew. Nobody knew the meaning of life. And even worse, nobody seemed troubled by the fact that they didn't know the meaning of life. And they didn't know the secret of happiness, which it just seemed extremely important to me to find the secret of happiness. And I was not persuaded that the pathways that people were opening to me were actually pathways to happiness. They just seemed rather random pathways to places I didn't particularly want to go. And I was real upset about it, quietly, because I was practical, and I didn't see any point in just flipping out. But I was real worried about it. And so when I read that in Vivekananda, and of course, you see, it was words in a book, but the consciousness that had put those words in the book had a revelation of the power of those words. So when I was reading the words in the book, what I was actually doing is I was opening the doorway to the revelation that Vivekananda himself had about that fact. because you can just say those words, and many people can just say those words, but the difference between scripture and ordinary writing is the difference between knowledge and wisdom, where I started. I'm not a person who lives only by the Bible, as some spiritual people do who are dedicated that way. I read more than just the Bible. But sometimes when I'm reading the New Testament, I can tell why people can just read the Bible over and over again, because it's revelation. And so those words open a door to the consciousness that perceived the reality and then reduced it down to a few words. It's really literally the same as Mother Kali. It's a revelation. So when Vivekananda said that to me, which is how I feel it, when he told me that today was because of yesterday and tomorrow is because of today, it was just like this. I'd been holding my breath for 18 and a half years. I'd just been holding my breath, and for the first time, I could exhale. Oh, here's something that is actually true. I felt like it was the first time. It was the first time I'd ever read anything that was actually true. And it told me what to do, which is, if I want my life to be a certain way, then I start taking action today that will bring that about. There were two other principles that I read at the same time, which told me how to live today to make tomorrow what I wanted it to be. One was, don't think about yourself and you'll be happy. Now, that's more than just, that's not self-abnegation. That's, don't identify with the limited egoic self. And again, it's not to suppress it, it's just to see who you are on a higher level and live in that higher reality. I mean, it was all, the revelation was all in that little sentence. Don't think about yourself and you'll be happy. In other words, the ego is the source of all bondage. Transcend the ego and bliss is automatic. And I understood that. And the other thing it said is love casts out all fear. Love, selflessly, love God, that's today. And then tomorrow will be a reflection of that. So simple. I mean, now it's like I was 18 and a half. I'll be 69 this year, so we're talking 50 years. I've been working on this solidly for 50 years, but it all still comes back to that, just what I was saying earlier. You don't need a lot of knowledge. You just need a true wisdom. And of course, all these years, it was 4 years later that I met Swami, 3 years later that I met him. And he personified for me, he exemplified, he showed me, he manifested in front of me, this is what it looks like. And, follow in my footsteps, and that'll tell you how to do it. Because I'd been struggling, even though I knew it was true. Well, how do you love so much that you don't fear anymore? How do you transcend the limitations of the egoic self? And I was studying and trying, but I hit myself, just boom, like that. It's the question that people ask Swamiji, do I need a guru? Oh no, Swamiji says. But if you really want, as long as you don't think you need a guru, you don't need one. But when you reach the limits of what you can do without the interceding grace of a guru, then you need a guru. And I had, in the 4 years from when Vivekananda spoke to me through his book, and the day I met Swami Kriyananda, I'd hit the limits way big. I'd really hit the limits. And I just knew that I just couldn't do it by myself. And then I just couldn't figure out what it looked like. And then there it was, standing right in front of me, Swami Kriyananda. Personification, that's the word. He personified the spiritual path perfectly. And, well, here we are, all these years later. This is what it was about. The future will be determined by how wisely or unwisely you live now. And then they add this, do your best today, and the results will take care of themselves. And when I was talking about my experience, my efforts to write that book about Swamiji, and just how hard it was when I was so concerned about the results. Everything I'd write, I would just think about how others would read it, and I just got so confused. And when I finally just wrote the story I had to tell, when I finally figured out what the story should be, which is, among other things, which is I gave up what I had been working with, which is actually a chronological story, which is what I'm doing now, 10 years later, and decided to do the little vignettes and to interview people and get other people's stories. I had a concept. I had a concept that was the same size as my consciousness. We were the same size. And then I just did it with great joy. And I just simply did it as well as I could, without knowing whether it was good or not. I knew it wasn't terrible, but I wasn't worried about whether it was good or not, because it was simply the best I could do. Now, there's always this, oh, but I could have done better. No, it's the best you can do. And the best you can do is when you're fully conscious while you do it. And fully conscious is as fully conscious as you can't be. That you give your heart to it and concentrate in the here and now. Just exactly what he was saying. And when you do that, it always comes out beautifully. Because every soul is really beautiful. Just every soul. When I did the book about Swami Kriyananda, and I have all my books right here, but I'm just going to plug these books shamelessly because they ought to sell better. Loved and Protected, Stories of Miracles and Answered Prayers. These are 2 books I've done. And both of them, I interviewed a lot of people. First, I interviewed people about their experiences with Swamiji, and the second one, I just interviewed people about their experiences with God, with the presence of God in their lives. And I've told you all this before, but I'm going to say it again. I can type fast enough that if somebody talks to me, I can type. And because the notes of interviews were just for myself, it didn't matter if there were spelling mistakes and so on. It was just the gist that I needed. And it was much better than recording, because then you have to transcribe, and it takes twice as long. So I could sit with my laptop like this and just type and not break eye contact. And people I could look into their eyes and look into their spirit and have them tell me what often for them were the most meaningful experiences of their lives. And for me, it taught me something I knew but I didn't know. I knew in principle, but I didn't know it in truth, which is that we are all equally loved by God. And we're equally loved by God because we're equally lovable. Not because we're good or smart or competent or anything, but just because the life force that shines out of every individual is the same divinity that is the substance of creation. And all we have to do is just be that. And that means to be sincere, to be as kind and as loving as we can, to be in the moment, and to be in that relationship with the divine. And creativity, Swami wrote a whole book, Art is a Hidden Message, and self-realization as a path. Creativity as a path to self-realization. I can't quite remember the name, but something like that. The artist is a channel. Art is a hidden message. Self-realization is a path. Art is a path. Because when we're being creative, it doesn't mean that we're doing something, as Swami often said, that's never been done before. It means that we're acting from our own point of origin. To be original. That's the word, to be original. And creativity is to be original. but it means to act from your own point of origin. And you can translate that into music or painting or words, as I do. But to be original is just to be sincerely and deeply yourself. Swami always uses the example, and it's a very valid one. He said, I love you is about the least original thing that you can say. It's just, everybody says it. But everybody says it because it's the right words if you do. But when you really look at someone that you love and you really say, I love you, it's completely original. It doesn't sound even slightly cliched because it's coming out of your point of origin. And our point of origin is God, it's divine. And so when we concentrate fully on what we're doing and don't let the past influence, in other words, don't let our egoic identification with our own experiences define us, and don't let our anticipated anxiety, expectations, hopes, dreams, unfulfilled things in the future distract us. When we concentrate completely in the here and now, we go into our point of origin. And you know, some people's destiny is very colorful. Swamiji said he has always felt, as he put it, like he sits on a volcano of creativity. And when he was a young monk at Mount Washington, he was just always teeming with creative ideas. And he said it took much more effort to hold back than it did to express them. And there was another very devoted soul there who Swamiji said was a very uncreative person. He just never had any creative ideas. But he was just so full of devotion. Swami used to envy him, he said, because, I mean, not really, but he used to think, you know, of the freedom that there would be just to be so simple compared to the enormous flow that was going through Swami. Of course, Swami had this great work to do, and he needed all of that to do it. It was God given to him. That was his point of origin. Swamiji once remarked that people often comment about the enormity of the projects he takes on. He said, but they never feel enormous to him. He said anything less, he would feel cramped. They're just the same size as his consciousness. It comes from his point of origin. And so this give your full attention to everything you do means to bring our consciousness to an exact focus and then concentrate from our point of origin. And then everything will take care of itself. When you've done your best, it's so free. Because if you've done your best, you've connected to your point of origin and you've offered what that is, whether it's just a little pot holder that you crocheted or whatever it might be. And then it's so easy to let it go. Do your best today and the results will take care of themselves. Nishkam karma. You just don't have to worry about it. This is who I am. Indeed, they will reflect the very best that is in you. The very best that is in you is God's presence. And all of this begins with just learning to concentrate. The Hong Sau meditation technique is the beginning. We learn to concentrate. The energization exercises gives power to that concentration. And then whatever assignment it is, you know, whatever it is, whether you're just washing the dishes, whether you're cutting carrots, making soup, painting a picture, writing a play, singing a song, giving a webinar. Just be in it completely. And also then, it's just like your whole life takes care of itself. Master said, fascinating statement, take care of the minutes, Master said, and incarnations will take care of themselves. Just every minute, just make that the best minute that you can make it. And then here comes the next one. And then, oh look, there's one right after that. I remember when I was very early on the path and I was always scattered, very scattered. I had the voice of God. It really was. An intuitive voice came to me and it said, what's your hurry, honey? It's just one damn thing after another. Just like that. I've always loved that. What is my hurry? Where do I expect to be except here and now? So simple. Not easy, but so simple. And such joy and such freedom in that. So, God bless you.